if I can do it, my gosh, you guys can achieve anything you desire. And I wholeheartedly know that. What's going on, guys? Today on Walking Manifestator, we're going to uncover the science of understanding manifestations. I am your host, Alexa Peña, and I am thrilled to be here. I am going to talk about understanding the science today. And the reason why I believe that is such a pivotal point in most people's manifestation journey is because in our primitive time, in our ancestors' time frames, a lot of the times we were very much surrounded by the feeling of knowing that we needed to hunt and we needed to go and gather food and we needed to survive. And in that time frame, our mind essentially was conditioned to survive. It was considered as survival of the fittest, right? And what I feel most of us have been conditioned by, especially nowadays, we are consumed by social media. We are consumed by what is somebody else doing. We're consumed by activities that are happening in our day to day activities, whether that be our families, whether that be our friends, our significant other. We are conditioned to be on the run, right? We're conditioned to just hustle and bustle. And for most of us, we don't take time to really look at how we are mentally doing, physically doing, spiritually doing until it is like the final breaking point, right? For some of us, at least that is how I embarked on my spiritual journey. And the reason why I bring up the primitive times that we were born in is because that is in our DNA. That has been scientifically proven. This is not some heebie-jeebie stuff, right, that we're talking about. Like, this is actual facts that scientists have been able to prove. I mean, from the molecules in our water, when we are talking to it with a certain frequency, there was a doctor that actually conducted a study about the water, and essentially he was talking to it in certain frequencies, like he was saying certain numbers to it, and the water was changing its overall state. And there's so much that I feel like we don't know until we really go down the rabbit hole of wanting to learn more, because we want to just be more educated in what we are, who we are, where do we come from. And I found this amazing, I mean, he is like one of my inspirations, Dr. Joe Dispenza. I love the way he explains so much of the mindset, and how, for my analytical, skeptics out there, how it makes sense to really understand from a science perspective that we are constantly manifesting. There was a study conducted that actually proved that we have over 6,000 thoughts a day. Like, think about that for a second. And most of them are negative thoughts because we are just hardwired to be thinking and to be on a like response mechanism. If somebody acts a certain way with us, what do? Right away, we want to get mad at them, or right away, we want to answer back, or maybe you hold it back and you don't say something, but subconsciously, internally, it upsets you and it let your energy be disturbed. So, as you continue to understand that there is actual science backing up manifestations and showing that we are constantly thinking, and what we think is what we're perceiving, we are able to really unleash this like innate power within us. That is the reason why I'm very, very passionate about manifestations, because we're always doing it, whether we realize it or not. And some people just feel like, oh, a manifestation, like you're talking about just, sitting in your room and having some deep breaths and putting some quiet music and, being in a state of meditation. However, I actually beg to differ. Like when you're manifesting is actually some of the times where you're surrounded in the most adversity, because as you have a situation happening at that moment, you are able to really dictate how you're going to react to it. You don't have any control over the other person. You have no control over how things are going to play out. But the one thing you do have control over is you. And I know from experience, like that it was easier said than done. I was the type of person that was just like, well, you don't like it, there's a door, leave. And I had a very condescending attitude. And as I went through this self healing, self awakening journey, I realized that a lot of those triggers in me were there based off situations that had conditioned my belief system, right? Because once upon a time, I was just conditioned to believe everybody leaves, right? Because when you grow up in a situation where you're lacking, whether that's your parents, whether that's a significant other, whether that's you've been abandoned, whatever it is that has made you feel like if people always leave, that becomes your reality. And ironically, you actually self sabotage. And that's actually one of the points that I'm making on. I don't know if I've told you guys, totally off subject here, but I am in this training where I am going to be giving my first TED Talk pretty soon. I am just super excited about that. And maybe we'll talk more about that on the next podcast. But this just goes to show, honestly, like if I can do it, my gosh, you guys can achieve anything you desire. And I wholeheartedly know that. And that was one of the points I was making about self sabotage. A lot of us, we are so conditioned by things that have happened in our life that we are automatically assuming that the person that maybe has no idea what it is that we're feeling, that we are now projecting onto them how we assume they're going to be. And I'll give you an example, because as you become aware of these things, you're able to start changing your reality. What you're not aware of, you can't change. Simple as that. And that's like the science behind it. That's one of the components. Those thoughts that you're having, right? If you're just having thoughts on autopilot all day long and you're not conscious of them, you never really realize what you're thinking about. You're just constantly in this like cruise control, and everything is just becoming negative because you allow that one thought to just have a domino effect on everything else. So, the mirror example. For most of us, we are very much so conditioned to thinking, oh, that person, they just look like they're not happy to be here. They just have a, a shish attitude, right? And for most of us, maybe we feel like, oh, well, that person just probably doesn't like me. Or we can sit here and go over so many different situations that I'm sure we've all experienced at one point or another. But I want to ask you something that one of my coaches really made me realize. Do you really know that for a fact? Or is that a mirror that they have that you are looking at yourself through? And let me explain it, because that to me really hit home. And when they said that to me, I was like, a mirror. Okay, so I'm projecting on to what I'm assuming based off how I feel about myself. It's nothing about them, but why am I thinking maybe they don't like me? Maybe because I'm insecure about myself. Or why am I thinking that they think I'm not smart enough? Maybe because that's how I'm seeing myself in that moment. Why am I feeling like I'm not worthy of giving a speech in front of the classroom, in front of the committee meeting, in front of wherever? Maybe because I don't feel that I am worthy of that internally. So as that happened, it really made me shift my focus. I was like, okay, so if I'm projecting onto these people how I am feeling about myself, that means that the reality is half of the people that I've encountered with that maybe just saw me as like, oh my gosh, you're a beautiful soul, or you know, I'm using examples of people that I've seen that way, right? Like, oh my gosh, you're a beautiful soul. Oh my gosh, I would love to learn more from you. Oh my gosh, like this type of vibe that you have is just something that I would love to be around. But because I have this own wall around me and this mirror in front of them, I am now projecting how I'm feeling about myself if I have not worked on myself. And this is why, for me, becoming aware is so crucial in your manifestation process. Anything you want to do in life, right? Whether it's you're trying to be more disciplined, whether it's you're trying to be more courageous, more outspoken, whatever it is in life, you need to be very conscious of what you're telling yourself internally in that dialogue that you have constantly going through your thoughts. You see, you are not the thoughts. You are the consciousness above the thoughts. And the moment you realize that, the moment that you embody this completely different perspective, one of my favorite books, and if you have not read it, I highly recommend you do. It is Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza. That's the doctor I was mentioning to you earlier. And he has had some amazing transformation with people. That there was this one lady, she was at the verge of literally dying. This girl, she had a husband, and her husband essentially committed suicide. And the family was left as the primary caregiver now, and she was obviously freaking out. She had two kids, what seemed from the outside looking in as a perfect life, because once again, we're very quick to judge, right? Based off like the book, the cover that we see. And she was mentioning too, in the book, that everybody could have seen that life of hers as like the perfect fairy tale, right? Two kids, great home, everything that seemed to be great. And one day she gets essentially the police knocking on her door, and they let her know that her husband jumped off one of the highest buildings in their area. And as the story goes on, it is just talking to you about how much she's consumed by her thoughts. She's feeling sorry for herself because obviously, like, who wouldn't feel sad in a situation like that, right? Like, you just lost the person that you love, and then also your support system, and then like your kids, they've lost their most important person as well. It's a culmination of things, right, that are happening in that moment. Well, this lady, as the story continues, and I'm making it very short for you guys here, so definitely encourage you guys to go and read the book. But she talks about how her vibration that she was in and her thoughts at that time, she was essentially just bringing more negativity into her life. And it shared something very important, which I'm going to give you my perspective in just a second. But she shares how whenever somebody would ask her, how did that make you feel? Like, or ask her like the question about, oh my gosh, like what happened? And she would go and just explain the whole story all over again every single time. Like, well, my husband committed suicide and me and my kids are abandoned and now we have to figure it out. And, actually the money that I thought was once there actually wasn't, he was in debt. And she would just like relive everything. Well, the more that she did that, the more she was actually causing her own death. She was a perfectly healthy person at one point. However, as the story moves on, she is literally at a point where she's like on a wheelchair because this lady had just consumed herself in her thoughts. And here's a quick side note. For most of us, we think that like our mental, our spiritual, and our physical health are all separate things. But that's not true. The reality is that every single one of those components are connected to the very fiber. If your physical is not doing good, your emotional is not going to be doing good. If your physical is not doing good, your spiritual is not going to be doing good. If your spiritual is not doing good, your emotional is not going to be doing good. You get the point. So when that happened, every single time that somebody would ask her that story or what had happened or whatever the case was, she would relive everything. And your mind, and I mentioned this in the last episode, your mind cannot distinguish between what is actually happening and what has already happened. Your subconscious essentially just thinks like, okay, we're reliving it. Like it does not know whether it's real or not. So what happens at that point, and conduct your own experiment, right? What happens when you think about something very sad in your life, something that literally brought you to tears, brought you to your knees? It brings all those emotions again. The same goes for something that is happy in your life. The moment that you think about that one day when you had your kid, or that one day that you graduated, or that one day that you got the job that nobody thought you would be able to, whatever it was, if you think about that for a second, it is such an empowering moment for you because you just relive everything and your mind is essentially releasing all these endorphins of happiness all over again. And this is one of the key components of manifestation and the science behind it, because at the end of the story, she essentially completely changes her life. She wanted to live. She was essentially already, sentenced to death by her doctor. They essentially said, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And at one point, she found herself thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to leave my kids all alone. Like now, my kids, everything that I have been doing to myself internally, like I wasn't thinking about them at that point. I was just thinking about myself and how I felt. So she goes on to look for help. And that's how she found Dr. Joe Dispenza. And she just embodies the material. That material essentially saved her life. She changed her entire paradigm. The doctors themselves were amazed by the turn of events because she lived when everybody was saying that she was going to die. And I think that that is so amazing because a lot of the times we're just so consumed by what we believe to be true. We're so consumed by, well, this is my reality. And poor me, I didn't have a family. And poor me, my family didn't have money. And poor me, because I didn't have the same opportunities as this other person did. But I want to invite us to change the narrator in our stories and stop playing the victim. Because yes, nobody's discrediting that those things that we've gone through were hard. And maybe for some of us were detrimental. And maybe for some of us were literally at the point where we did not see past that and we felt like it was easier to maybe not be here anymore. But the moment that we change the narrator, and we actually now put ourselves in a situation where we say, okay, what could I have learned from that? Whether it was the ugliest situation you've been through, and trust me, I have my fair share, I have learned to really now see those opportunities, those lessons, as something that really propelled me into a higher and better version of myself. How would we know what is good without the bad? Have you ever thought about that? Like, truly think about that. How would you know what is good if you do not know what bad is? We need the bad to appreciate the good. And I never saw it that way, guys. Like, for me, I remember just being the person that, like, don't talk to me about positivity. Like, there's no such thing, that doesn't exist. Like, I, have nothing, no one, and this is me, myself, and I against the world. And I remember those times of my life just being so dark, having no support system, having no feelings of wanting to just be here in general. And the fact that I was able to go through those things, honestly, was a blessing in disguise, because those exact things that happened have actually allowed me to now speak from experience and connect to some beautiful souls in this world where I see what they've been through. And my gosh, I just admire them so much, because you can see their pureness in their heart. You can see that they talk to you from a space of care, love. And for most of us, because we didn't grow up in that environment, because we didn't grow up thinking that those things were possible, we allowed the noise for so long to just consume us and drown out what we really are, what we really stand for. You see, understanding the science behind everything, I mean, from studies that have been conducted in, neuroplasticity, to how our overall system is wired, to the mechanics behind the mind, everything boils down to the fact that everything starts with the thought. Everything. Like from the brothers that created the first aircraft to the people that, essentially decided they wanted to start Facebook, to the people that, we admire in our society. They had a thought at one point. So like we all read it when we were in school, like Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. And to many people, that was like such a, like, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. But yet he stood for something bigger than what he, at that point in time, knew how to achieve. But he knew that he believed. And for most of us, we've been so conditioned by society that just essentially has told us, like, who are you to dream that? Like, who are you to think that you can do that? Who are you to believe that you are going to be the exception and you're going to achieve those things? You see, all of those things that you're hearing, or that you've heard, they all come from insecurities that these people have in themselves, because that is all they ever heard growing up. You see, my kid was bullied actually last year, and he was in first grade at that point, and a kid essentially told him, this was something that didn't just come from my son, like literally there was other little kids that heard it, and my kid was just like shocked, and just thinking about it just like, brings all these emotions. And the kid essentially told my son, he looked over at him and he said, I want to kill you. This kid moved over from Turkey. And you see, at that point, when I got that call, I had two thoughts in my mind. One of them was, thank God he's alive. Thank God everything's okay. And then the human in me wanted to just be mad and was like, oh my gosh, like, how can somebody have so much hate? Like, why would somebody even think about that? And then my awareness kicked in, and I was like, you know what? I don't know what that kid is going through at his home. Thank God he's alive. Thank God everything's okay with my son. I headed to the school. And as I went over to pick him up, I talked to the principal. We made a report. The police were involved because it was an actual threat. So it was this whole thing. And I talked to my son, and this is literally what just amazed me. And this is why, by us changing ourselves and working on ourselves, we're making a ripple effect on our kids, on our nieces and nephews, on kids that we just come across. He told me he was sad, he had cried, but then he was like, it's okay, mommy. We don't know what he's been through. And maybe he doesn't have a mommy at home like you. And that, guys, was such a realization for me, because I was like, oh my gosh, like, this kid gets it and he's 7. Like, what I would have, like, think about that. Like, what we would have been if we would have, like, started thinking this way at a younger age. It doesn't matter when you start. It doesn't matter if you're 60 right now. It doesn't matter if you're, 14. It doesn't matter. The point is to start. The point is for you to start working on yourself, because everything has a ripple effect. Everything has a reaction to what you're putting out there. And I'm putting love into my kid, and my kid reciprocated that love back to somebody in a situation where it wasn't ideal. It was definitely traumatic, but we worked past it. And he is a kid just full of love still. He's a kid that I know at that age, my gosh, like when I was 8 years old, I was already having to raise my little brother because of some stuff that at that time had happened. And it just goes to show, when you break that chain, things can happen. Things can just shift. So, with that being said, guys, I hope you guys found any of this information useful. I know this material has completely changed my life, and that's why I'm doing these podcasts. This is why I'm embarking on this mission. I want to bring awareness to the conscious collectiveness, and I want to bring awareness that we are all one. And I want to bring awareness that we can change and we can be a better version of ourselves. All you have to do is think about what you want to do. It's 80% mindset, 20% action, guys. So I hope you guys have a fantastic day. I am super honored to have been here with you all and that you lend me your ear. And I send you guys much love, many blessings, and I will talk to you guys on the next one.